There's also just the pain and trauma of your womb experiencing some of these physical procedures or attempts at becoming a mother and not succeeding. And sadly, a lot of women will share feeling numbed out, dissociated, or disconnected from their bodies or from their womb space, and feeling angry or hopeless or frustrated with their bodies and with their wombs. And this is where somatic practices, gentle self-touch, and other approaches can be very healing and medicinal. Welcome to the Red Thread, Fertility, Healing, and the Embodied Journey. I'm your host, Shreyasi Broadhecker. This podcast was created for women who are walking a medically assisted fertility journey, such as IVF or IUI, and feeling like there has to be more than just getting through it. More support, more understanding, and a deeper way of staying connected to yourself along the way. Here we explore the emotional, physical, and spiritual layers of this experience through honest conversation, shared stories, and insights to help you feel held on an isolating path. Wherever you find yourself right now, whether things feel uncertain, overwhelming, or heavy, you don't have to carry it on your own. This is the Red Thread, a space where you can slow down, feel what's here, and gently find your way back to yourself. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Red Thread podcast, Fertility, Healing, and the Embodied Journey. Today, I'd like to explore the emotional experience of being on an IVF or IUI journey. This is a recurrent theme of the Red Thread podcast. This isn't the first time you've heard this, and it won't be the last, but I wanted to create an episode dedicated to sitting with the emotional aspects of this journey of a medicalized conception path and naming some of these experiences that women or couples can have along the way. My hope is that this episode will give you a sense of someone knowing or seeing what you're going through, feeling heard or witnessed, or inspiring conversations for you within your part of the world, maybe with other women or friends, or wanting to explore perhaps with curiosity fertility support spaces and support groups where you can take a deeper dive into some of these emotional aspects. I also wanted to touch on this to acknowledge that IVF or IUI is more than medical. There's an immense emotional impact along the way, and it can be a lasting impact that influences who you are as a woman, as a parent or mother or partner well after you conceive, during your pregnancy, postpartum, and beyond. As a psychiatrist, I have had the opportunity to support women with their mental health at different stages of their journey. I've also had the opportunity of providing both pharmacological and non-pharmacological support. And I'm thinking in particular of being in fertility support spaces where I witness women's stories, I witness their lived experience, and I connect because of also being on an IVF IUI journey. And so when we share today, or when I talk about some of these emotional aspects, I really would love for you to sit with what I share and see if any of it works in your world. Does it apply to you? Does it land in your heart and in your womb? It may or may not, because we are all unique human beings, and each of us has our own journey that got us to the point of being on an IVF or IUI path. You may have your stories of the ways you grew up, the things you experienced in early life. You may have unique or distinctive coping styles to deal with stress or uncertainty or tough times that you're bringing onto your path or your journey with IVF and IUI. And you might even have a history of emotional well-being or needing some support with anxiety, depression, or other emotional challenges. We're all unique. And as I share some of these emotional impacts of the medicalized assisted or medically assisted conception journey, I would love for you to practice discernment and noticing what lands for you and what doesn't. And if there are aspects that don't apply for you, you can choose to let them be here in this space. If there are aspects that resonate for you, I invite you to pace yourself. Take some time to really sit with any emotions that are arising. You can journal about them. You can reach out to me. If you would like some support, you can access a local fertility support group, or you could even access some mental health support. I'll bring this up again at the end of the episode, but I would love for this to be an informational episode where you feel empowered, seen, and held. And if it is generating anxiety or panic or other intense emotional states, that's okay. And you can take care of yourself through that. I will share or spend some time in other podcast episodes on how we can then tend to or nurture ourselves through these emotional experiences. But I will very broadly explore some ways we can feel supported and anchored in today's episode as well. So how can we begin to look at the emotional aspects of IVF and IUI? Well, the first thing I think it's important to name is grief. There are several layers of loss and grief on an IVF IUI journey. Even if you've had a journey that was relatively short, that was successful, that was something that you felt very embodied within, empowered within, you felt good about, you felt it was aligned with your life values and your dreams and your visions, you may still experience moments of grief. Some of the ways that grief can hit us, even when we least expect it, is the fact that we're even on this journey. There is the possibility or potential for gratitude, for some gratitude around the technologies that are accessible to us, that allow us or enable us to go on this journey to become parents. It's remarkable. It's divine technology, in my personal opinion. And this wasn't how you wanted to be a mom. For some of us, perhaps for some individuals listening to this podcast, you always knew you would be utilizing this route of fertility to become a parent. But for most people on this journey, it isn't necessarily where you thought you'd be. And so often I'll hear in spaces about the dreams that women had of becoming a mother at a certain age, having a family, raising a family in different decades of their life, perhaps with a partner, an aligned partner, perhaps solo. And that can be a grief in itself of being in this position and maybe not knowing or expecting that you'd be here. If you are feeling some grief around that, that makes you human, and that's entirely understandable. And it's just something I hope you can validate for yourself if you do have those moments. There's also the grief of something that hasn't happened yet. Maybe grieving that you aren't pregnant yet. Maybe you've had an opportunity to have a few different procedures of IUI or IVF, some cycles, and you haven't yet conceived. That is a grief. There may be other aspects of grief along this journey. Some women or couples experience grief if they aren't able to conceive with themselves and their partners. If you are utilizing donor sperm or donor eggs, there may be some grief around that. If there was a specific timeline in creating your family that hasn't come to fruition or hasn't come to be, that may bring up feelings of loss or sadness. You might have expected that your conception or your path to being a mother would be a whole lot more straightforward than what you're dealing with. And that's valid. It's valid to feel grief around that. And this is a unique form of grief. We sometimes call it ambiguous grief or disenfranchised grief because it isn't the kind of grief that you can find on a card in a grocery store. You hear people talking about, we don't have funerals or services or memorials for these moments of loss and grief in our life. And a lot of people feel quite isolated in this grief because they don't even have words for it or know who they can speak to in their personal life about it. Who can we speak to if people just don't get it? And that's where fertility support groups or spaces can be such medicine and healing for you. If you're a listener to this episode wondering where you could even speak about this grief, a fertility support group might be an option, a grief counselor, a psychologist or therapist with experience or interest in supporting women through infertility or fertility related struggles. Those are all places that you may feel you could speak about this grief. And I hope that hearing these episodes on the podcast, listening in, can also help you feel validated in your grief. Your grief matters. Your grief is precious. Your heart is precious. And listening to spaces like this, tuning in, can also be a way for you to acknowledge and remember your grief and honor your grief. Of course, I'll share episodes where we talk more about honoring and acknowledging grief and rituals or ceremonies that can help with that process. But for today, I really just wanted to name that there is grief on this path. And the next piece of what I wanted to share, grief coexists with hope, with joy, with anticipation, with excitement. It's wild how many different emotions a person can feel at the same time. You can feel happy for being in a treatment cycle where things are going smoothly, and you can feel grief thinking about the last time you had a treatment cycle and experienced a pregnancy loss. You can feel supported and loved by a partner who is with you on this journey. And you can feel incredibly frustrated that they just don't get it. They're not in your body, especially if you're the one receiving medical procedures. They'll never quite get it. And that can feel frustrating or sad or disappointing. And you can have both the love and the frustration. These are just a couple of examples. Others that are coming to mind are envy. Envy is one that women really struggle with. Feeling envy or a sense of lack or a sense of inadequacy or shame, thinking that they've done something wrong or they're not the woman they ought to be because of societal messaging and expectations and internal expectations you might have of the ways you would become a mother. You can have these feelings coexisting with a determination or hope or faith or optimism about entering your next treatment cycle. So it is a roller coaster on an IVF IUI journey. It's an emotional roller coaster, and there's hope, there's disappointment, there's ups, there's downs. All of it can coexist in the same moment. And often I'll say to women, you don't have to pick and choose. You can feel all of it. It's exhausting to feel all of it. Don't get me wrong, but you are able to witness and feel different parts of your emotional experience and your landscape and give them attention. You don't have to just focus on the parts you feel will be more positive or more socially acceptable. All of these parts live within you. You're a complex, beautiful human being. You have a heart that feels all of this. And IVF or IUI really runs the gamut of emotional experience. We feel an entire spectrum of emotion. And that is a big part of this journey that isn't always recognized or named. You may have times you have cycles of renewed hope. You're waiting, you're anxious, you're fearing potential disappointment. You may be grieving past outcomes. You may be grieving losses of life, pregnancy losses. You may feel guilt. You may feel anxiety. You may feel rage. And I just think that whatever you're feeling, it's important to know that you don't have to fall apart. A lot of women feel scared to let themselves fully feel what they are because they're worried they'll fall apart. And I say you cope with and hold a lot more than you can imagine, and you're capable of a lot more than you know. And I would invite you to start to notice some of these feelings in a very paced way, taking your time, only feeling what feels possible or capable in your body and in your heart and womb at any moment, journaling about it, letting yourself have perhaps timed intervals to feel these emotions, sharing them with trusted others, maybe mental health professionals, journaling about them. These are all ways that you can feel. I also find that women who are artistic or creative can use that artistic expression as a channel or an anchor to express your emotional experience in a way that feels liberating or cathartic or uplifting or dark, whatever comes to mind for you. Those are some ways to acknowledge and name the spectrum, the wide spectrum of emotions you might experience on the IVF IUI journey. Let's take a pause from the episode for a moment, as I'd love to share a few resources with you. If you're moving through your medically assisted fertility journey and feeling overwhelmed or disconnected, I've created a library of guided meditations and somatic practices to help you feel more grounded, regulated, and supported in your body. This is the Red Thread Library. If this feels supportive for you, you can explore more about the Red Thread Library at my website, www.shreysibrodecker.com. And now let's come back to the conversation. And it can feel exhausting to just stay positive. I don't know how any of us can just stay positive. And that is messaging we hear. People, well-intentioned others, can often tell you to relax, to stay positive, just go on a vacation. It'll work out. Everything happens. And truthfully, everything does happen in divine timing, and you may not want to hear that, and it may not land for you in this moment. And so you get to decide what you want to feel today. Allow yourself to feel it, and notice if you are still within what I call your window of tolerance, meaning, are you still in your body? Are you still connected to what you're feeling? Do you still feel able to hold these emotions in this moment? If you notice you're veering out of or going outside your window of tolerance, grounding yourself, going out in nature, taking deep breaths, distracting, taking breaks, speaking to trusted others are all ways to help you feel safe and back in your window of tolerance. This is a life journey. This is a practice. You don't have to continually sit in the emotions that feel hard or heavy. You can come back to them when you're able. The other emotional aspect of being on an IVF or IUI journey that I'd love to speak to today is how it sometimes affects your sense of self-worth. I've heard this a few times. Women who feel like there's something wrong with them if they aren't mothers, if they haven't become mothers in a certain timeline, or if they've tried a few cycles of treatment and they still haven't managed to conceive, or they've conceived and unfortunately sustained pregnancy losses, it can really take a toll on your sense of self-worth, on your identity, on your relationship to your body, to your feminine body, to your heart, to your womb, to your sexual identity, your sexuality, and your sensuality. All of these are aspects of our identity that can really shift on an IVF IUI journey. Even your identity or role as a parent or your future vision of your life can be shaken up by being on an IVF or IUI journey. And there is the possibility that after a period of time, you decide if this is something you keep going with or something you have a sense of completion about. Maybe not closure. Maybe there's some grief there, but there is the possibility for people on this journey that they decide they don't want to keep going. And then it's about figuring out their lives as child-free individuals and how that will look. And so it is just important to remember you might feel 1,000 times that you've lost who you are. You don't know who you are on this path, and you'll find yourself. You'll come back to who you are. And there are ways to do that, and it takes time, but it's okay if you feel lost. And it's okay if you feel like you're navigating this drastic identity crisis over and over on this path. I think emotionally, we don't necessarily name that. And it's a part of IVF and IUI. It's part of a medicalized fertility journey. And I think if you are someone who can relate to this part that I'm sharing, you're not alone, and it's very natural and it's common, unfortunately, on this path. A lot of people will share with me that they're living two lives, that they're functioning at work, at home, in their career, in their social circles, in their families, with their finances potentially. And at the other side of it, underneath, there's days where they feel like they're falling apart. They're feeling hopeless, wobbly. They're consumed internally with constant planning or rumination, spirals of anxiety. And so it can feel very disorienting to live these two lives at the same time. Most people never quite let go of the fertility part at the back of their minds. It's always going, even when you're doing real life outside of fertility, it feels like it's always in the background. And that disorientation or that sense of living in parallel lives or universes is an aspect of being on this path. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're going crazy. It's just part of what you are expected cognitively to navigate on this kind of a path or journey. And that also leads me to talking about the mask. There are times you feel you have to wear a mask and you're not as authentic. And sometimes it's adaptive and you get to decide when you wear your mask and when you don't. But I hope there are times that you can take that mask off and you can just be yourself with at least one other person in your life, because it's exhausting to always wear this mask of competence and capacity and optimism when you don't feel it on the inside. I want to name that and to know that it's okay for you to have times you wear that mask or you need to put on a brave front. And I hope that there are times you can just be yourself and let all of that drop away and just take some deep breaths, even if it's in private. And I do think connections are so helpful for exploring those moments and for being authentic. And you can do that in nature. You can do that with animals. You can do that with other people in fertility support spaces. And you can do that with mental health professionals if you find someone who you can really trust and feel safe around. There is an impact to all this waiting for test results, waiting for embryo development in an IVF cycle, waiting for results of genetic testing of embryos, if that's your experience, and waiting to know if you've conceived, if you're pregnant as a result of your medical treatment. That's a lot of waiting. And there's waiting that you don't expect. Perhaps you have a medical diagnosis such as endometriosis or PCOS, or you have fibroids that need to be addressed surgically. And then you're waiting for these procedures. And then, of course, if you've gone through a cycle that hasn't been successful and you're waiting for the next time you can attempt, that's a wait too. And emotionally, this chronic uncertainty can keep us in a state of prolonged stress in our bodies. Often we feel activated. Most of the time we're dealing with this chronic stress of uncertainty, waiting, unpredictable outcomes. That has an impact on the nervous system. And there are ways to tend to that uncertainty and to help yourself feel more supported and to promote promote more vitality inside of the female nervous system, which will also be explored on the Red Thread podcast. Today, I'd like to talk about, like I said, grounding, the importance of feeling held by Mother Nature, connecting with people. Social connections can really help you support your nervous system, especially as women. We have that oxytocin release when we're in circles with other women we trust, when we feel held or loved, when we feel attachment, then our nervous systems can thrive. And that can happen even within a more narrow window. Perhaps you are chronically activated and your nervous system can take breaks in these ways. And then there's the decision fatigue of being on this path and having to decide on which treatments to go forward with, when you're going to go forward with this. If you have genetic testing as part of your treatments, then the genetic testing choices can also create decision fatigue. Donor options, selecting a donor that feels aligned for you. And of course, financial decisions. And like I said a little earlier, that sort of big decision of when to keep going and when to pause or when to stop altogether, because that's also valid. And so I just wanted to name decision fatigue as another aspect of emotional impact that maybe isn't spoken about on the IVF IUI journey. Socially, financially, there are sometimes hits. For example, you may notice people who were supportive at the start of your journey aren't always as available as you continue on a journey that may have taken longer than expected. Or you'll find that there are some friends who you can deepen friendships with, or you acquire new friendships, especially in fertility support spaces. And then there may be friendships that fall to the wayside because there isn't that connection anymore. Sadly, you're moving forward on this IVF or IUI path, and for various reasons, you can't connect to people who were friends from an earlier phase of your life. And there can be a sense of isolation and loss of friendships on this path. Financially, there is an intense amount of pressure. We sometimes don't recognize what we're walking into. And often when you first start to know the prices of different procedures, there can be a phase of shock or reality setting in, anxiety or apprehension. And then hopefully you're able to muster internal and external resources to help you manage some of those financial predicaments. But that is a big stressor that often is shared in fertility support spaces, and that can affect the emotional experience of attempting to conceive with medically assisted fertility. There's also this piece that I will name here and then we'll expand into in future episodes of this podcast, which is the impact of being on this journey on your body, on your female body, your nervous system, your emotional body, of course, and your womb space. There's this idea of trauma, and some women may relate and some may not, in terms of naming your experiences as traumatic or at best perhaps difficult. It can be the case that if you've had a really unpleasant or uncomfortable treatment, physically or emotionally, or a test or procedure, that your body will brace, or you may feel hypervigilant or highly fearful before subsequent procedures. There are times where women have shared with me their fears waiting for their pregnancy test, or they've had a pregnancy test come back positive and they've known themselves personally a history of pregnancy loss on a previous treatment cycle. And so they have ongoing anxiety because of those experiences as the weeks go by. And of course, there's grief for embryos that may be lost or pregnancies lost in previous cycles that still impacts you as you go along your treatment path today. And then there's also just the pain and trauma of your womb, experiencing some of these physical procedures or attempts at becoming a mother and not succeeding. And sadly, a lot of women will share feeling numbed out, dissociated, or disconnected from their bodies or from their womb space, and feeling angry or hopeless or frustrated with their bodies and with their wombs. And this is where somatic practices, gentle self-touch, and other approaches can be very healing and medicinal. And I do share more about that in subsequent episodes of the podcast. I will also have some wonderful guest speakers speaking to the somatic and the ways that womb tending, ceremonial womb tending, holistic practices, and other ways to connect with your womb can be very healing on this path, perhaps to help you recover from previous experiences or to sustain you as you keep walking this journey into the future when you conceive. And I won't be touching on this in much depth today, but of course, if you are partnered in this journey, your relationship will go through numerous stressors and challenges being a couple on this path, either trying to conceive on your own, utilizing donor sperm or donor eggs, perhaps your partner navigating procedures of their own. And partners often feel very helpless and unable to express their grief or support their partner who's going through the journey and receiving the medical procedures and treatments. And I think that it's important to name the impact on a couple or on relationships from going through IVF, IUI, infertility, and so forth. Listening to all of these ways that our emotional experience can express on an IVF or IUI journey, I invite you now to take some deep breaths, a deep inhale through your nose and exhale through the mouth with a sigh or sound that wants to be here. Let's just take a few deep breaths in this way, and with each breath, inviting you to release anything that you're holding on to that feels heavy or overwhelming in this moment. I appreciate that as I've been sharing today, there might have been some big emotions surfacing for you. Maybe you're making connections or having realizations of your experience or something that you've buried or just put aside because there was no time to think about or feel it. Or you might even feel a sense of relief or release, knowing that somebody is naming what you've had a hard time putting words to, but perhaps hearing it in the podcast episode today, it felt real. It felt relatable and something that landed for you. Whatever your emotional experience today, I honor it and I invite you to acknowledge how you're feeling. And then I also wanted to mention that if you're wanting support or ways to tend to your emotional experience during this journey of IVF or IUI, you have a few options. You can connect to mental health providers, counselors, or therapists who may be well-versed in infertility or medicalized fertility journeys. There may be a fertility support group locally or online that you can connect. And you're also welcome to reach out to me and access my website for programs supporting women who are going through IVF and IUI and wanting to tend to their medical, emotional, spiritual, and somatic elements of the journey in a holistic way. I appreciate you taking the time to listen today. And before we leave, I wanted to give you a preview of some of the ways that we can actively take care of ourselves and tend to our emotions on this journey. These are methods or approaches that we'll dive into in more depth in future episodes, and they include building connections and sisterhood with other women who get it, journaling or creative expression, mindfulness, mindful self-compassion, devotional womb tending, and somatic practices, to help you drop into the heart and womb space and to allow for you to have a spiritual practice, if that lands, and a way to tend to your soul's needs on this journey and to find ways to feel faith and hope and joy. Thank you so much for listening in to this episode on the emotional experience of IUI and IVF. I hope it's been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for taking the time to join me today on the podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please like, share, and leave a review. You can also connect with me at my website, www.shreysibroadhecker.com, or at Instagram at Shreyasi_Broadhecker to stay in touch and explore more of the work I do. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode. Disclaimer. The content shared on this podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes and is not a substitute for medical or psychological advice. Every fertility journey is unique, so I encourage you to connect with your healthcare provider or qualified professional for support that's right for you. Any views or opinions shared by guests are their own.